Good morning, Fourth. I am pleased that I actually get to work with you today. The internet is back up. Unfortunately, it looks like Schoology is having a little temporary issue. So if you are finding trouble opening up your Schoology, not just you, but I'm still going to do the lesson today and you'll be able to get that done. If not in this moment, at a later moment. So let's tell you what you can expect today and this week. So the first thing I should tell you that you can expect is I will be back next Monday. So you'll see this face in person and it'll be awkward at first, and then we'll move past it. If you were hoping to say a thank you to Ms. Grindy, this week would be a good time to do it. She'll still be in the building, but timing wise, this would be a good time to do it. Luckily, yesterday when our internet was having issues, you had a work day. So today, day 2, I get to tell you about Unit 4. So I'm going to get you started on what the requirements and the goals are for social speeches. That's our next unit. Then I'm going to go over with you the social speech formula and the different types so you can start deciding, which one of these do I want to do? Thursday, you're going to be evaluating examples for social speech and for PV likes. So in other words, you'll watch student examples or online ones. You get to choose which you prefer. I believe it's 2 because I shortened all the work this week because of our internet issues. So you'll watch 2 and then write how well they applied the formula and how well they did on those performing aspects, PV likes. So that's Thursday. Friday, I have moved our story to Friday because today has quite a bit of information in it. So I'll tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story about what it's like to have scoliosis. So it'll be a little awkward, but hopefully entertaining for you. Then I'm going to teach you on Friday how to choose your social speech type and topic, and you're going to outline that on your handout. So that's the work for this week. Let's show you what this looks like on the handout here, just to preview a little bit, and then I'll go back and talk about deadlines overall. So as you can see, your work this week is formative. 12 points total. So you get 4 points for showing your for completing the prompts on the social speech types, 4 points for evaluating those 2 examples, and then 3 points for sketching out how you think your speech will go. So we'll start today on task 1. When I go over the different types, you get to decide what information you're going to put for these. Frankly, if I was a student, I would write the things I think are most interesting or most important. So I'll go through all the different types. You'll write 2 things for each. You get to decide what. And just as usual, this writing will be graded on content, not on how you formulated it. So I'm not looking for beautiful, perfect sentences. I'm looking for info. So we'll do that for all of the types, which are anniversary, eulogy, wedding, commencement, and award. And then here is where we'll start Thursday. So that's our goal for today. So we'll go over the different types and you'll write 2 things for each. So let's talk a little bit about deadlines as we continue through the quarter here. Just like last quarter, you are going to have staggered deadlines for getting in work. Spring tends to be a time where, I'll be blunt, people kind of slack off. I've done it, it happens. What matters is how you recover. And unfortunately, one of the problems I've run into in the past couple of years is students asking me to teach them the entire quarter the night before it's due. So we're avoiding that. I'm also staggering the deadline so that you're getting good feedback on your work. So here's what you can expect as far as deadlines go. So, and currently we're in week 2. So week 4 is mid-quarter. Those grades will be posted for you. Next week, you can expect a grade update from me with your 4th quarter grade so far and your semester grade so far, so you can see where you're at. Week 5 is going to be the deadline for week 1 and 2 work. So if you have questions on that work, here is the time to ask leading up to week 5. Don't wait until the night before it's due on week 5. All right. Week 6, deadline for weeks 3 through 5 work. Week 7, week 6 and 7, absolute deadline is then. The last day for seniors is Tuesday, June 1st. That's week 8. So I am not, of course, going to assign work when you're not in class. That makes no sense. So seniors, you can expect that this week 7 is really the end of your work for this course. Another reason why I have the deadline staggered. All right. Still not 100% sure for you other lovelies, you juniors, what we're going to do for week 8. It really depends on what the policy will be on finals. I, of course, will let you know. Same kind of idea here, except this gives you an overview of the units, what you can expect. So we will be finishing the social speech in week 4. That's when you will be performing it. Same week as mid-quarter. Okay. Week 5, again, here's that deadline for you, and we will start the next unit, which is storytelling speech. Depending on where we're at progress-wise, that may be our last unit. It really just depends. I try to I've consciously designed this class so that the harder stuff is toward the beginning and the more fun, easy stuff toward the end. So these last 2 speeches should be easier, and other students have told me are easier than the ones previously because they're a little more open. So here's where the notes will start. I'll go over the rubric today, and I'll go over the types and the formula, the social speech types. I started the notes with this quote from Jerry Seinfeld about, according to most studies, I'll just read it, people's number 1 fear is public speaking. Number 2 is death. Death is number 2. Does that sound right? This means to the average person, if you go to a funeral, you're better off in the casket than doing the eulogy. So one of the most intimidating speeches I have ever had to give was a eulogy. And this is a speech for someone who has passed on. It's a real high pressure situation. Luckily, I already had a little bit of a public speaking background to help. So I want to make sure that you folks in this unit, when you're done, you know how to do most of the quote real life speeches out there. So these are the speeches that you often end up doing: an anniversary toast, a wedding toast, graduation speech, things like that. These are social speeches. So let's tell you how you're going to be graded on this. This is the performance rubric, of course. So it's summative, 25 points total. So pace and timing. Notice I always start with that. So was your pace appropriate to the type of social speech? And were you in the time window of 1.5 to 3 minutes? Notice that's shorter than your last speech. And the reason why is typically social speeches in life are shorter speeches. Your audience is a lot more distracted than they are in other occasions. So I want you to write a speech that's typical of what you'd see in real life, 1.5 to 3 minutes for this one. Second part of your grade, 15 points, is PV legs, or PV leg, I should say. S is already included in that first part. So that's 3 points each for using all those performing aspects. It says on here, note, voice and life are especially important for social speeches because you're helping people process emotions related to life events. So we'll talk a lot as we're writing this about how to handle people, essentially, how to anticipate what they'll be going through emotionally and to help them process that, whether it's joy or grief. All right, finally, have you written the social speech using the formula, using the templates? So that's 5 points. Now, in your last speech, persuasive, filler words were counted. They aren't counted on the last 2 speeches. We only do that for one speech so that you're aware of it, but I don't want it to become all-consuming. Public speaking is way more than worrying about ums. Also, in social speeches, you're allowed to use a script, and sometimes that means a little more filler words. So let's talk about the different kinds of social speeches. So this is really teeny, so I'm just going to read this part. So the different types are wedding toast, anniversary toast, historical significance, so talking about the anniversary of a historical event, Eulogy or tribute. Eulogy is for a speech about a person who has passed. A tribute, same kind of ideas, just the person is alive. Commencement, that means graduation. And I'm also going to teach you how to give an award, because that's pretty common. The main formula for social speeches is this. So it has 4 main steps. And you will see this again on your template for writing the speech. I will have these pieces in there for you to write, so you don't have to worry about missing one. So the first part of every social speech is introducing yourself in relation to the event. So in most social speeches, not everyone there knows who you are and what you're trying to do with the social speaking. So basically, you have to introduce yourself and make your purpose really clear. You also want to make your connections to other people or to the event clear. For example, I've unfortunately / fortunately, because I'm teaching you, been to a lot of funerals. And one of the things that I see that happens a lot at funerals is someone will go up to speak about the person who has passed, and they don't start with who they are and how they know the person that has passed. And because our lives are fairly big, funerals have a diverse group of people at them. I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting at a funeral kind of just confused because the person is up there talking about the deceased, but we have no clue who they are or how they know them. Usually, how that gets fixed is someone leans over and goes, "That's his brother." And you're like, oh, honey. So it helps a lot to start with who you are, what you're there to do, and how you're connected. So, for example, at my father's funeral, same deal. There were so many people from different parts of his life that I thought it was important to start with, "I'm Monica, Bill's daughter." And then you usually say to the people that it's your honor to be there, even if it's a sad occasion you're speaking at. So it's my sad honor to thank you for attending today's service to celebrate Bill's life. So notice that includes who I am, the relation to the event, and what the purpose is. What are we here to do? The second step of every social speech, give background either on the significance of the event or the people. For example, at my brother's wedding, my brother Derek, I could have said something like, I did say something along the lines of, "Derek and Melissa are made for one another, and today we celebrate their new family." So you're giving a little bit of background about, here's who I am, and then you transition into, here's what we are doing. Okay? One thing you work on throughout the speech, in the body mostly, is you develop a theme or a motif. And that's to help bring people together. A lot of times this involves infamous quotes. So quotes from either people who are famous or people who are historically important. So for example, unfortunately, when my cousin passed, he passed when he was very young. So it was an especially rough funeral because it was tragic and he was so young. So one of the motifs of, or theme, if you will, one of the themes of the funeral speech for him was how sad it was, like, and what attitude to take with it. So my cousin loved the Harry Potter books, but especially Dumbledore. So I used Dumbledore quotes to establish a theme of, it's okay, he's in a better place. A lot of times you can develop a theme with little stories. So wedding speeches will usually have a little story about how the couple met or the moment you knew they were made for one another. In commencement speeches, usually people talk about the life lessons of school, and they'll include little quotes there. Anniversary speeches, you're talking about people who've been married a long time. Typically, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to talk about, what's the theme of this relationship? Is it patience? Is it compromise? What is it? It could be laughter. People relate more to stories than they do to just talking. So the more you can put this in a storytelling format, the better. And then finally, all social speeches end with a last thought on the significance of the event or with a famous quotation that fits. Unlike the introduction and the persuasive speeches that you've written, you don't have to have a call to action. Gosh, and some of these you really wouldn't want to. You don't need a call to action. You don't need a so what point. It's you just kind of closing with a last thought. Typically, you don't say in conclusion at all in a social speech. So let me give you an example of what this might sound like. So at a commencement, for instance, at a graduation, you could end with, remember graduates, we win when we try and when we work. As Winston Churchill wisely said, never, never, never give up. That kind of thing. That's how it'll sound. At a wedding or an anniversary, typically, depending on your culture, it's a toast. So you can either, you get to choose if you actually want to hold up a glass when you perform it, an imaginary one. No, you may not have an actual glass of liquor in your speech. Thank you. But yeah, usually those end with a toast, like here's to the happy couple, or here's to many more years together, whichever feels more appropriate for your speech. So that's the formula. This slide and the following ones, notice I have it broken down by intro, body, and conclusion. These are examples for you so that when you're writing this, you can go back and go, oh, I'm doing an anniversary. How do I write there? I got most of them on here for you. So here's all your options. I went over those at the beginning. Again, wrote them clearly here for you so that you can go back and reference this. I've also included for every single speech online videos of real life examples of these. So for example, for historical anniversary, I have an example from President Reagan. And here I give you a little bit of the background. So if you choose to watch that video, either just to see how it's done or curiosity, or for your evaluation on task 2, you know what's happening in the video. So let's start with anniversary speeches. So here I'm going to tell you the different types, and you're going to write down 2 things on your week 2 handout for each of them. So anniversary speeches usually are either historical or wedding. So let's start with historical. And I've included here, notice it says FD. This is, if you were to perform this in real life, this is typically how your final draft would look. These are typically the options. In this class, I'm not going to require you have, for example, a nice, pretty notebook to present with. So for historical, you only include facts that highlight a theme or a story of the invention. Historically, you want to tell people what the event is and why it's significant. You don't want to just lecture with facts. You want to pull out examples that show why this historical anniversary is important. So for example, if you watch the President Reagan example, he gave a speech about D-Day on the 40th anniversary of it on the beaches of Normandy. So he went to France and talked about why this is so important and what we owe soldiers when they give us their service. He does this by telling a story of a woman whose father went to war. So you're going to see in all of these, a little bit of storytelling is important. For a wedding anniversary speech, you're going to think of the specifics of what makes the couple work. So if they've been together for 30 years, what are the things you think of when you think of them? You can include quotes on love and marriage if you want. I find it works better just to talk about the couple themselves, tell some little stories. So for example, and by the way, one of the great things about social speeches is all of them are an opportunity to show the people we love how much we love them. We don't get a lot of chances to do that. That's what's great about these. So let's say I was giving a historical wedding or a wedding anniversary speech for my grandparents, which I did. They were together for literally 50 years. I can't even imagine that. That's crazy. So when I talked about them, I talked about mischief is the main theme of their marriage. The two of them really just enjoy teasing one another. So when I gave that speech, I went up and told the whole audience, including the couple. That's the other tricky thing about social speeches. The people you're talking about are usually right there. So I talked about how the little pranks my grandpa would pull on my grandma and vice versa. And that seemed to work pretty well. They were laughing. One thing you want to avoid that sometimes happens in social speeches is either oversharing or doing what's called going blue. Going blue is where you swear a lot or you tell a story that's not really crowd appropriate. I'll give you a little bit of an example. So my friend, she invited me to her parents' 20th wedding anniversary. I grew up with them. And she's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go give this speech." Oh my goodness. Some of the things she discussed about her parents, no, you don't talk about that in a speech. She talked about their sexual relationship. Typically, you want to avoid that topic in any speech, but especially wedding anniversaries and wedding toasts. I don't know if it's the nerves or what it is, but I've seen so many people in wedding toasts talk about that kind of thing, and it tends to make some people in the audience quite isolated. So you want to avoid that. So there's some examples. All right, let's move on to the next type of speech, a eulogy or a tribute. So the only difference between these two, as I mentioned, is that in a tribute, the person is still alive and you're saying why they're so important. So if it's a eulogy, if you're talking about someone who has passed, it can be really overwhelming to decide, what do I even say, because you're grieving. One thing that helps, use quotes. Go find infamous quotes that help frame your writing. For example, one of my favorite quotes is Queen Elizabeth I said, "Grief is the price we pay for love." That's a perfect quote. It explains it. It's a lot easier than you trying to express your feelings. Typically, you're talking about the person's life, why we're grieving them. Some folks, when this goes wrong, they will just go up there and list the person's life like it's facts, like it's some sort of historical fact sheet. Like they go up and, he was born in this year, he went to elementary school. Like they give a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. So don't list all the things in the person's life. It's much better to select a couple of things that are memorable. And as always, stories, stories, stories. You don't just go up there and say, "She was so kind." How do you know? Show us. Show us her kindness. Now, one thing that's also tricky with eulogies is if they had a difficult life or a traumatic end, it's hard to know, like, what do I say? It's awkward. I've learned that this is the best approach. Acknowledge lovingly the good and the bad. Your goal in doing this is to help the room heal. Life is for the living, right? So are funerals. The person who's passed is already gone. So you can absolutely acknowledge some of the rough stuff. For example, my dad was a bit of a character, a lot of a character. If I went up there and started talking about him like he was a saint, that wouldn't make any sense, nor would it have helped anyone there grieve. So instead, I told stories about how dad being tough and a character helped his children learn to be tough and that being a character was okay. Now, I know I mentioned about the bad. So my father, for instance, and I'm telling these personal examples because I know that I'm not the only one who's had these experiences. I'm trying to model. So my father, for instance, his passing was sudden and it was difficult because he overdosed. And one of the tricky things about funerals like that is, what do I say? Like, what do I say? Everyone in the room is thinking about it. Do I acknowledge it? You absolutely can if you do it tastefully. So things that we said about my dad to help with that was, we said things like, it's really sad what happened and we are all upset about it, but he's in a better place. So typically, if you acknowledge the bad, move quickly on to the good. Don't dwell in it. Funerals are especially lonely as well because you have so many people from different parts of that person's life and they're grieving, and a lot of times they don't have anyone to talk to. Funerals can be very isolating. So one thing I suggest as well is try to find ways to connect people in a eulogy. So you can gesture at people and say things like, "from all the parts of his life," stuff like that. So enough on that. Let's talk about wedding. So wedding toasts typically are kind of tricky because people are distracted. There's a lot going on at a wedding. People are eating, they're drinking, they're having a fun time. So, couple of tips. Like I said, stories, stories, stories. If people are distracted, pull them in Pull them into what you're talking about with your voice, with life, and with poise. So be excited when you're talking about the relationship. Have that up energy. It also helps start your toast by looking at the bride and the groom, and then you can start including the rest of the room. But start by looking right at them as you talk. If you make a joke, which is very common in a wedding toast, give people a second or two to react. That's one of the key things with comedic timing. People need time to get the joke, especially when they're distracted. I mentioned earlier, don't go blue. So don't make lame sex or marriage jokes. Those are rough. I can't tell you how many weddings I've been to where the bride is like inwardly furious because the toast is all about, yeah, the old ball and chain, there goes your fun. And she's like, so my job is what? To be his keeper? I think not. So it's better, instead of making jokes like that, it's better to talk about what makes these people wonderful individually and together. And then, of course, again, quotes. So, for example, when my best friend Bonnie got married, I got to give the toast. So I got to talk about how we're all now a family because these two people have married. We're all now connected. So that kind of happy positivity works really well for wedding. Commencement, also known as a graduation speech. Typically, you start these with your name. And yes, you'll already be introduced, but this is your chance to reiterate who you are and thank people. So typically people will say things like, as Mr. Benty said, I'm Ashley, and I'm here today for our graduation. I would like to thank the parents, the teachers, the staff, everyone who helped us get to this day. That's typical. One of the examples I have on here for you is an atypical commencement speech, a little more creative. I encourage you to go creative on all of these. If you're wondering, what if I don't have like a real social event? You can absolutely make up your context. You can also, your tone doesn't have to be serious. It can be fun. So for example, if you're a student who would never be the graduation speaker, you got grades like Miss C did in high school, this is your chance to give commencement from the other point of view, perhaps from the procrastinator's point of view. Same thing with eulogy or any of the other speeches. I have had students in the past who've given a wedding toast for two celebrities who are not married. I've had students in the past also do a eulogy for someone they didn't know or someone who's not really alive. Give you an example. Captain Crunch was probably one of the funniest eulogies I've seen. I wish I had a video of it. Oh my gosh. A student gave an entire eulogy about how Captain Crunch had passed away and how important Captain Crunch was to America. So you can have fun with these. Going back to graduation. So graduation is mostly for the parents. Let's be honest, that ceremony is not for you. Very few teenagers are like, please, please, can I sit through a ceremony? Although maybe this year is different because we've come to appreciate things more now that we've had it taken away with COVID. Graduation's mostly for parents. So make sure you thank them and address them. This is their finish line. After 18 years of your nonsense. So give them a shout out in the beginning. One thing that always happens when you're doing a speech to a large school or a large group, by the way, is about a minute in, you feel like no one can hear you because you don't have that audience connection. They're too far away. It just feels that way. I've noticed this. About a minute in, you suddenly feel like no one can hear me. The mic's not working. Check faces to see if that's true. One of the very few times I've had a mic go out, every face in that front row was like, mic. So the other thing you do for commencement speeches is you talk about what you've learned in high school. So typically lessons and what you're going to do with those lessons in the future. So where you're headed. One thing to avoid is journey cliches and quoting Dr. Seuss's "Oh, the Places You'll Go." That's been done many, many times. Like I said before, stories. If you use stories, it feels less like a lecture or a cult induction. And then again, famous quotations. And here are some resources for you. Two of these are fairly humorous. All right, good. I was like, I'm on the last one, right? Award. So let's talk about the last one, award. So this can be receiving or giving an award, up to you how you want to set this up. Typically, this happens at a banquet. So typically there's a meal involved. So again, you got people distracted with all of the things that involve food. Awards are usually about promoting the organization that's handing them out and less about the person. So if you are either writing giving or receiving of award, have an organization in there and make sure to thank them. And again, you can make up this context. Award events are also about networking. So if you ever get to attend one, do so because you learn about job offers, you get to meet people who are interested in the same thing as you. Strongly suggest. When you're giving an award, be clear what the person had to do to achieve the award. And again, you can make it up. So if you give best laugh to somebody, explain what is it about their laugh? Is it musical? Does it have a snort? What is it? When you're receiving an award, be clear who helped you. So you always give thanks. So it could be, I just want to tell you a little story about my grandmother. This is true, by the way, who one time I made the mistake of saying, I'm bored. She said, oh, that's a dangerous sentence, and got me working. So she taught me a lot about work. It helps to tell stories, don't list. So those are your types. Hopefully you're starting to think of one that you want to do. Tomorrow, as I said, going to watch examples of these, and then by Friday, you need to know your topic and start outlining it. So it's absolutely okay if I just said, oh, you're thinking of your type, and you're like, no, I do. It's okay to think about it. And again, you can be creative. So at this point, let's put us to slide 1 and then give you Falcons some time to work on this stuff. So the rest of the time is for you to work. And as always, if you need things, I'm right here.